Hey dudes, what's up? So, we're no stranger to this. A few days ago, we wrapped up the Ottomans versus the Portuguese in the Ottoman-Portuguese Wars by kings and generals. And this battle actually popped up in that series, which kind of shocked me. I didn't expect this. But this was still recommended to me, and so I'm still gonna do it. Yeah, essentially this is where the king of Portugal, Sebastian, right? That's his name. Sebastian essentially calls a crusade against Morocco because he doesn't want the influence of the Ottoman slash, Islamic forces there. So he essentially goes back trying to defeat the new king. There were three brothers, though. He wanted to instill the first brother, who lost his throne, through his two other brothers. So, as it all ends, essentially they all die. All three kings die in this battle, which is insane, you know. And overall, yeah, like I said, we're not a stranger to this, and that kind of marked the end of like Portugal's independence for now. And because afterwards the Spanish took over Portugal, became all united under the Habsburg, family, and kind of marked the end of the Ottoman Portuguese War, which makes sense because I guess since Portugal as a independent entity ceased to exist shortly thereafter. And yeah, overall, it's gonna be interesting to see how History March describes these events. I'm actually really looking forward to it. And yeah, unfortunately I'm not going into this blind. I already know what's up, but I think we'll still have fun. So without any further ado, let us get to it let's watch The Battle of the Three Kings by History March.
As the sun rose through the mountains of the Rif and the Middle Atlas, Sultan Abd al-Malik led his army in prayer. Then he mounted his horse, surrounded by 5 sacred banners and regiments of bodyguards. Across the field arrayed the Crusader army in a large square formation, their cannons in the front, commanded by the young King Sebastian, with all the great lords of Portugal at his side, as the royal standards of his global maritime empire flutter in the gentle breeze. Sebastian came here to become the first Christian emperor of Morocco. Morocco endured a prolonged crisis in the 15th and early 16th century. The Portuguese occupation of nearly all seaports brought about numerous economic, political, and cultural issues. And the decline only worsened when the Wattasids assumed power, as they did little to try and improve the situation, resulting in the breakdown of trade, the impoverishment of towns, decline of the intellectual life, and the stagnation of population growth. Against this backdrop of Wattasid conciliatory policy towards the Catholic kingdoms to the north, the Saadi dynasty arose in southern Morocco, determined to re-establish order and curb the expansionist ambitions of the Iberian kingdoms. Namely, there were 3 distinct reasons that motivated the Saadi Sharifs to organize the tribes of southern Morocco. First, the encroachment of the Portuguese further into interior lands of Morocco alarmed local leaders and caused them to seek redress against the Europeans. Second, the centuries-old trade routes, which had been an important part of the trans-Saharan economy, were now being challenged by European privateers, who were supported by their monarchs at home. They aggressively tried to monopolize trade by establishing trading posts in strategic locations along the Atlantic coast, and this substitution of desert overland routes for the faster sea voyages became a considerable advantage for the Europeans, which crippled the local economies. Third, Saadi Sharifs feared what they called the Turkish peril. The Ottoman Empire was in its zenith, its power stretching across 3 continents, and there were few, if any, countries strong enough to stop their relentless expansion. And Constantinople had ambitions in Morocco, having supported the Wattasids as their clients, which allowed them to remain in power for decades. However, the Saadis were a formidable opponent. Their dynasty's origins are attributed to the family of Al-Bayt, which were a group of relatives of Prophet Muhammad, and their ancestors lived in Hijaz, from where they went to Western Africa to spread their religion.
Hey, carrots.
It was
Okay, so I'm really liking the background. Like, I think HistoryMarche does this, and I'm really liking this different take, because, like, yeah, Kings and Generals kind of drops us here as a part of the Ottoman-Portuguese War, and, you know, he doesn't really give the background of Morocco itself, just the political situation leading to the Battle of the Three Kings, the immediate one. So HistoryMarche is breaking it all down, which I really do appreciate it, especially how the locals will be seeing the Portuguese, and, you know, and we saw this several times where the Portuguese would just establish, you know, trading posts and whatnot in areas. Like, we saw this, like, in the Indian Sea ocean, and many of the locals kind of viewed them as unwelcome guests for the most part. They didn't really have the greatest public PR, to put it nicely, and so it's cool to see that how the natives of Morocco kind of view it, and why, you know, this branch right here is moving and even has kind of an anti-European mindset. And also just a cool little aspect of its ties to Islam and Muhammad and whatnot. Overall, yeah, this is what I really like about HistoryMarche. Seldomly does he ever, like, just go into a battle. He really likes to break down just the history leading up to the battle, which I do appreciate.
This prophetic lineage that enabled the Saadis to resist the Ottomans, and a period of prosperity followed under the efficient rule of Muhammad al-Sheikh, who expanded the realm and was particularly effective in driving out the Portuguese from most of their strongholds, and also destroyed the Ottoman-backed Wattasids in the north of the country, becoming the first Saadi sultan to rule over Morocco. Al-Sheikh had 3 sons: Abdallah al-Ghalib, Abd al-Malik, and Ahmed al-Mansur. From a very young age, all 3 of his sons showed exceptional potential for statesmanship and military leadership. But Sultan al-Sheikh met an untimely death when he was assassinated by the Ottomans in 1557, and his eldest son al-Ghalib took the throne. He would go on to rule Morocco for 17 years, further consolidating his father's gains, successfully defending the realm against the Portuguese, the Spanish, as well as the Ottomans. By now, the people of Morocco regarded the Saadis as heroes, but when al-Ghalib died in 1574, the dynasty faced its first crisis. Namely, when the late Sultan took the throne 17 years ago, his younger brothers Abd al-Malik and Ahmed al-Mansur fled Morocco to escape his purge of all dynastic rivals in the country.
Yeah, fratricide, right? I believe is the term. I believe. Yeah, fratricide was a really common, like, really kind of sad thing, but a very common thing. Especially we see this a lot in history, and we got a lot of it in the Rise of the Ottoman Empire series, where even freaking it was so common that freaking Mehmed the Conqueror was like, let's make it legal. I'm telling you, it does not inspire much familiar love, does it? To know that that your siblings who you're growing up with, you're probably gonna end up killing them when you're older, right? Like, again, like, definitely, there are a lot of comforts with being in the higher up, I guess, the more royals of, especially back in the past, compared to being, like, a commoner or whatnot. But, like, it also came with its own baggage and kind of sadness, you know, like, it is a really lonely world, I think, being at the top, especially, like, around these empires and, you know, because, like, you can't even trust family. I don't know, I've just been thinking about that as of late. It seems like a really just sad, lonely existence, to a certain degree, you know? Like, yeah, can't even trust family, man.
Country. The then
Oh yeah,
15
I also want to comment. I was impressed by Morocco when we covered this in the Kings and Generals video. I was really impressed that Morocco kind of even went on to have a golden age, resisting, you know, the influence of not only the European powers of Portugal and Spain, which were basically trying to divide the whole world between themselves, but even the Ottomans. Like, you know, Morocco's kind of like, it is impressive, right? How they managed to retain their, like, their independence amongst these juggernauts of the world at this point. Like, I don't know, I just find that so impressive, and just a cool little history that even after this battle they go on to have their own little golden age. So I don't know, I just think that's cool. And, you know, I did really admire that at the end that they didn't, you know, you had this, like, sort of proxy war between Portugal and the Ottomans, or Europe and the Ottomans. Like, who's gonna influence Morocco, and Morocco at the end's like, now we're gonna be our own thing. Like, I don't know, I just find that kind of like such a baller thing. And like I said, they're small, I guess, compared to these giants, a more smaller player in the world, but the fact that they just stood on business, essentially, and kind of remained their own thing is just impressive. Very impressive and very cool.
year-old Prince Al-Malik and the 8-year-old Al-Mansur were forced to seek refuge and settled in Ottoman-ruled Algeria, in Algiers on the coast, a bustling new city enriched by the plunder from the corsair captains. From there, some years later, the two brothers traveled the vast expanses of the mighty Ottoman Empire, gaining valuable experience, as well as education and training from their generous hosts. The two princes participated and distinguished themselves in the disastrous Battle of Lepanto in 1571, and volunteered to take part in the recapture of Tunis in 1574. It was this fighting spirit that brought them to the attention of Sultan Murat III, who sought to expand Ottoman influence into Morocco and offered to provide the older brother Abd al-Malik with men, money and munitions to help him take the Saadi throne. In exchange, Abd al-Malik promised to pay 15 tons of gold as tribute and lease the port of Larache to the Ottoman fleet. Acquiring such a large and well-built port on the Atlantic would allow the Ottoman Empire to outflank Spain in future naval conflicts, and would give the Algerian corsairs an opportunity to intercept the silver bullion being shipped from South America to Seville. However, it was agreed that these plans would be put on hold for now, as Al-Malik did not want to antagonize Spain, and also aimed to prevent Morocco from becoming an Ottoman protectorate. The Ottoman-backed invasion of Morocco in 1576 was a resounding success. With Sultan al-Ghalib dying 2 years prior, his son Abdallah Muhammad II suffered 3 successive defeats at the hands of al-Malik, and with an already weak hold on power, he was forced to flee the country, deciding to seek help in recovering his throne from none other than the Portuguese Empire, an old enemy of the Saadi dynasty, as Abd al-Malik became the new Sultan of Morocco. This was music to King Sebastian's ears, who began preparations straight away. He now had a pretext to invade and conquer Morocco, under the cover of helping his ally Abdallah Muhammad to regain his throne. But, more importantly, the invasion was an opportunity to slow down the seemingly unstoppable advance of the Ottoman military machine towards the Atlantic, which could threaten the security of the Portuguese coast, their strongholds in Western Africa, as well as their invaluable trade from across the Atlantic. The 24-year-old Sebastian became King of Portugal at the age of 3. He was mostly looked after by his grandmother, and although she was a devout Roman Catholic, his uncle and other patriotic anti-Castilian court members ensured that Sebastian would be raised a Jesuit. It's said that he was a bright but impulsive boy, and being very fond of military pursuits, he was trained by Portuguese knights in jousting, riding, and sword fighting. And from an early age it was perhaps the Jesuit order that instilled in him a fanatical desire to conquer Morocco and win glory for Portugal. Indeed, even as a boy,
This all makes too much sense of what's about to happen. I'll comment more about Sebastian and my thoughts of him once we get, more closer to the actual battle. But, this explains a lot of his behavior, which I was a bit, worried about during the Kings and Generals video. But, yeah.
Sebastian spoke of leading a crusader army that would destroy the Sultanate of Morocco and converting the population of North Africa to Christianity, determined to succeed where his predecessors had failed. This mindset had widespread support in Portugal because of the obvious benefits the empire would have from the trade of gold, cattle, wheat, sugar, and other produce, which offered opportunities to the mercantile bourgeoisie and the nobility. And now, in June 1578, Sebastian attended a service in Lisbon's cathedral, where he was presented with a battle standard embroidered with an imperial crown, and soon after the Portuguese army of some 23,000 troops embarked from the harbour, carried by a fleet of 500 ships. It included 2,000 Portuguese knights, around 8,000 mercenaries, mostly Germans, Castilians, English and Italians, as well as a papal infantry contingent, with the core of the army consisting of Portuguese and Moorish troops. The flower of the Portuguese nobility accompanied Sebastian with their retinues, with the most powerful dukes and petty kings unanimously supporting the king's crusade. The army made landfall near the Portuguese fortress of Asila in the first days of July. As he disembarked, King Sebastian spotted a Moroccan detachment in the nearby hills. On the spot, he hastily assembled a contingent of knights and charged to chase off the enemy, without waiting for the rest of his army. The garrison on the walls of Asila watched on in amazement, and the thousands of troops on the beach and on the ships were encouraged that they would be serving under a fearless young commander who would lead them from the front.
Yeah, about that. Okay, so overall, I do like this more in-depth look of Sebastian that HistoryMarche is giving us. I'll say though, I gotta admit though, I was really worried, the whole bringing all the nobility with him, and as we see in the battle when it starts, he personally leading the charge. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot to admire about, monarchs who get their hands dirty, right? Who are in the thick of the fighting, it's like that quote from that Troy movie, imagine a king who fights his own battles, wouldn't that be a sight? And obviously there is pretext of monarchs such as Alexander the Great being one of probably the most famous, of leading from the front, being in the thick of the fighting, and we all love him for it because he was awesome and brave and tough. And I suppose it's just in that line of history where one, if it works out, great, you're awesome. If it doesn't, not great, you were not awesome, I guess. I guess that's kind of the fine line of what makes certain men great and others not so great. The thing is with Sebastian, definitely he's brave, he's not a coward, and he is bold. It's just the thing is, even with Alexander, like obviously we have the hindsight of knowing Alexander, survives all his battles, and even there's pretext in the ancient world or older periods of history of kings personally getting their hands dirty, but I was always kind of like, it's a bit reckless. Like, even with Alexander, I'm like, like in the first battle against the Persians, he almost straight up died in his first battle, and obviously we know he survives, until an untimely illness gets him. But even then, I'm like, that's so nerve-wracking. Like the thing is about some of these monarchs, they're way too important to die. Like the moment they pass, usually that creates instant political instability where they're from, and the fact that he brought all these, nobles with him, it's frightening. Like even with Alexander, like if you could watch back in my older, when we were covering the Alexander the Great series by Kings and Generals, even I'm like, I think I called him reckless, it worked out, so at the end, he's great, and I guess, like I said, it's that success thing that separates, failures from, victors, right? Like, it worked out for them, therefore we all praise them. But even then, I was still saying Alexander's very reckless. He's a bit too important to always be in the front, even though he was, and again, we've seen monarchs from all these channels and videos we've seen monarchs die, and that instantly create a thing. It's like some of these guys are too important, so I always think it's wiser when like, if you want to be there, by all means, kind of like Napoleon was there, but Napoleon wasn't granted, Napoleon was an artilleryman, maybe not the best example, but, leading not in the too thick of it, like, being there is one thing, but, being too in the thick of it, I think is way too dangerous, man. And Sebastian's probably a big indicator of that. I guess what I'm saying is, I think, probably best for someone as important, like the overall general or commander, monarch, if they want to be there, that's fine, but maybe to be a bit more leading from the back or the rear, probably better, to better coordinate and whatnot, safer, and if something happens, their life is the most important, so they should be the one to escape and preserve it, And again, I don't mean to, like, talk down to, like, people who did do that, like Alexander or Sebastian. It's just like, these guys, it's like I always kind of thought, I understand we love kings and generals who lead from the front and who are in the thick of the fighting, but sometimes it's like probably best that they be put back, maybe safer positions, just in case, because you have to think about like your empire and the stability that could happen if you were to die, because war at the end isn't a game. And Sebastian's just one of the people, unfortunately, who played a dangerous game and didn't succeed, unlike Alexander who did. Sebastian, on the other hand, brave, daring, bold, but he got himself killed, and that didn't do wonders for Portugal at the end, you know what I mean? I don't think I got my point across as well as I was hoping to. Like, I'm trying to condemn, it's just, you know what I mean, right? It's just, some of these guys' lives are too important, and I feel like sometimes it works out, definitely, like with Alexander I keep mentioning, but on the other hand, you can see the disastrous consequences of, like, when someone like Sebastian, it doesn't work out, like with Sebastian, for example. By the way, I don't dislike Sebastian, I'm just saying, it just didn't work out for him, unfortunately. But, I think he had the right spirit, at least in that regard, but oh well. I don't know, I'm gonna stop rambling. I don't think I'm even getting my point across, or what I meant to, but oh well.
However, further progress into Moroccan territory was halted, as the Crusaders would spend the entire month of July assembling their vast camp into marching order. Weighed down by the thousands of camp followers, servants, priests, women, page boys and slaves, as well as the fully mobile royal court, portable pavilions for the nobility, chapels and a royal choir, all fully provisioning the Portuguese nobility with all of their daily comforts. Needless to say, some of the troops did not enjoy languishing on the beach as they ate through their supplies, and became disenchanted with the stalled crusade. But the march finally continued on July 29th. As the army moved south, it quickly became apparent that Sebastian had no intention of capturing the key port city of Larache in order to secure the coast. Instead, he led his army inland to confront what he considered to be the main heathen army, aiming to strike a decisive blow that would enable him to conquer the entire Sultanate of Morocco. Meanwhile, Sultan Abd al-Malik was on his way from Marrakesh. He had been preparing to resist the invasion for the past 18 months, and once word reached him that the Crusader fleet left Lisbon a month earlier, he summoned the tribes of Morocco to defend their nation, their families, and their faith. Tens of thousands of warriors answered the call of the son of the great Mohammed al-Sheikh, the first Saadi Sultan of Morocco. But most importantly, Sultan al-Malik's younger brother, Ahmad al-Mansur, who was serving as governor of Fez, brought with him the men of the northern hills. An army of some 50,000 assembled just northwest of the town of Al-Qasr Kabir to meet the invaders as they crossed the Macassan River on August the 3rd. Tomorrow they would do battle. Without too much scouting ahead, when the Portuguese army crossed the river, they were bewildered by the large numbers of tribal cavalry and infantry that were assembling across the field. King Sebastian immediately decided that the only tactical option for his much smaller force of 23,000 was to form into a vast square. In the center, the wagon train.
Yeah, that's the thing, though. It's like beyond outnumbered. He had like what, around 20,000, and the Moroccans had like 50 to 60,000, and so yeah, that's the thing, though. I mean, we've seen they had pikes and guns, so the square ain't a bad formation, especially against like a cavalry thing. It's honestly probably the best formation you can get against a cavalry heavy force. Especially with, like I said, their weapons of the pike and guns they had. Not a bad formation, but well, we know what happens to it. It kind of reminds me, I think it was the Battle of Magnesia, or Magnesium, I forgot the official name. It's where the Seleucid Emperor Antiochus the Third faced the Romans, and I think some accounts of that battle is that the main center of Antiochus kind of got in this giant pike square formation, and that the Romans couldn't actually penetrate it, and then they had to rely on like getting the elephants in the center angry, so then they broke through from within, allowing the Romans to get that. That's kind of like another historical battle, I think, of where a giant mass pike square was assembled, you know, and some factors caused it to break. Though Kings and Generals telling, it just seems like they got overwhelmed this one, and they just parts of it just broke off trying to escape. So yeah.
Formed as a fort to protect the camp followers and provide a central anchor for the army. Portuguese regiments formed the flanks and rear of the square, mixed with contingents of cavalry and professional troops to boost their morale and keep the men in line. The front of the square was a formidable force, formed by experienced German and Italian mercenaries and other volunteers armed with arquebuses, who were trained to shoot and reload behind the protection of the wall of German pikemen. In addition, aiming to break up a potential massive charge by the Moroccans, Sebastian placed a series of wooden forts made of wagons which bristled with sharpshooters. Finally, an elite shock regiment of heavy cavalry was drawn up in the front. Although vastly outnumbered, Sebastian's army was better equipped and more technologically advanced. On the other side of the field, the 50,000-strong Moroccan army formed a crescent shape. In the center, disciplined infantry and arquebusiers were arrayed in two lines, each several ranks deep. To either side were Moroccan townsmen, as well as renegades from Spain and Turkey. The third line was formed of Berber soldiers and cavalrymen on the flanks. Realizing that the Crusaders were better equipped and possessed technologically superior weaponry, Sultan Abd al-Malik rode out to galvanize the men. "You must oppose the Crusaders with valor, for you fight for your families, your life, and your honor. And should you die today, you will be led into paradise." With their confidence raised, the troops cheered al-Malik's name as he rejoined the ranks. But no one knew the Sultan's secret, which was that he was dying. Suffering from either the plague or camp fever, the progress of the disease was accelerated by horse riding for several hundred kilometers in a forced march to reach the battlefield. Only the Sultan's brother and his faithful Jewish doctor knew the true personal cost that the Sultan would pay. And, reaching the limit of his skills, the doctor could only use his art to give the Sultan another day or two of vigor, urging him to rest. But
yeah, I forgot how Kings and Generals put it. I think he died during the battle, before its conclusion, definitely, and that was kept a secret, so as not to, you know, demoralize the men. It was either slightly before or during the battle. And again, that's just a great act of bravery from al-Malik, you know what I mean? You know, the fact that he did that, gave that speech, did all this while straight up dying is actually incredibly metal. And I have to give him his praise. It all worked out at the end for him, right?
Al-Malik refused to retire to his tent, insisting that there must not be even a hint of suspicion about his illness in order to preserve the morale of the troops. Knowing he had little time left, he embraced his brother Ahmed, with whom he experienced decades of exile and spilled blood at Lepanto and Tunis, and told him to fight, conquer, or die. There was no more time to waste. Artillery of the two armies sounded off in full force, but needed to spend a couple of hours drawing closer to find the range. Then, an hour before noon, the whole Crusader army knelt together as one in one last prayer. When they rose, the Portuguese elite shock cavalry leapt forth first on King Sebastian's command, followed by the Castilian crack infantry regiment. The king, though vastly outnumbered, decided to utilize his superior troops and strike decisively in order to avoid being overwhelmed by the enemy, knowing that his elite shock cavalry could single-handedly break and rout an enemy army many times their numbers. As the ground trembled under the hooves of the Crusader cavalry, Moroccan arquebusiers fired. Although their volleys were effective, the long reload time allowed Sebastian's crack troops to close the distance. As the Crusaders flung themselves into Al-Malik's center, the Moroccan division in the front was broken instantly. The second line could not hold the Crusader charge and was pushed back, and as the Castilian infantry joined the fighting, the Moroccan center was thrown into confusion.
Yeah, so I always got the impression when we were watching the Kings and Generals video, it seemed like, yeah, Sebastian, you know, he charged, and then basically, like, divided the center, essentially, like, breaking through it, and I'm guessing his plan was just to keep breaking until the... It's a bit weird. So, like, definitely he had a great head start in the center over here, right? His cavalry breaking through and wreaking havoc. Though the rest of the army goes on to attack the square while he's still fighting in the center. So I'm, like... His plan actually kind of confused me. I'm assuming that the plan was keep breaking through the center. I'm not sure if he wanted to threaten the Sultan's life directly, or just demoralize them by crushing their center and then maybe turning back around to deal with the rest. I'm not sure, but as we know, eventually the center gets halted and everyone else just attacks the square and eventually breaks it. So I'm not sure if he ever actually had a chance. Or if this tactic was the best he utilized. I mean, again, I think with the square formation, that's a great defensive formation to get into, for sure. Though I'm wondering if it was the best for the battle. I can't think of many other alternatives. But a part of me wonders if he actually ever did have a chance. Or was this like... Or were his tactics... how much it needed to be changed. I don't know. It's something I'm just thinking about at the moment.
Al-Malik leapt forward with his bodyguards to help prevent the line from faltering, signaling the third line to reinforce the center. As the unstoppable Crusader heavy cavalry hacked through the enemy center, the Muslims held on by a thread, and it seemed like their cohesion would break at any moment. Leading from the front, Al-Malik and his regiment of experienced bodyguards, helped by the counterattack of Berber infantry from the third line, finally blunted the brave Crusader assault. And now, seeing that Sebastian's best troops were locked in ferocious fighting with his center, the Sultan gave the signal to his brother. Waves of tribal horsemen emerged from behind the small, gentle hills and undulated land of the valley, led by Ahmad al-Mansur. The impetus of the seemingly stunned Crusader cavalry had gone, as the gravity of the situation became clear, with nearly 20,000 tribal horsemen now surging forward. The elite Christian troops began fighting their way back towards the main line to escape Al-Malik's trap, realizing that their forward push was now in vain. The Sultan ordered his infantry to envelop the Crusader vanguard, and with his personal regiment of bodyguards, he disengaged from the fighting to join his brother's cavalry attack that was bearing down on the Portuguese defensive square.
Again, the fact he did all of this while dying is insane. You know what I mean? That the dude was built different. And I'm wondering if this telling is different, because the Kings and Generals telling is the one that I'm thinking about as I've been talking during this video. And in that telling, Sebastian was at the front in this charge, though history marches seem to be that he's not there, so I'm wondering if there's a different account, because I think Kings and Generals may have mentioned the account he used was, I think, I forgot, was it pro-Portuguese? I forgot. So I'm wondering if History Marche is using something different. I don't know, so far I am noticing a difference, at least in that regard, between the two tellings, you know?
Sebastian and his officers encouraged the men, knowing that what was soon to come would be a fight to the death. Meanwhile, in the Crusader vanguard, some of the Castilian elite infantry was trampled as the heavy cavalry was trying to retreat, and their situation was becoming increasingly desperate, with Moroccan troops now coming from all sides. But Sebastian replied by launching a cavalry attack of his own. As the Portuguese infantry parted to allow the mounted knights to pass through, the king led his nobles and their retinues, as well as the cavalry contingent of the deposed Sultan Abdallah Muhammad, directly towards Al-Malik's banner, knowing that if he could strike the Sultan down, the battle would be won. Sebastian smashed into Al-Malik's contingent. The ferocious charge allowed the king's retinue to cut their way through to within a few meters of the Sultan, who used the last ounce of his strength to draw his sword and join the fighting. Blows were traded back and forth, and for a few moments the fate of Morocco hung in the balance, as one by one the Islamic standards fell around the Sultan. But the steadfast bodyguards held their ground and managed to rally around their leader. Sebastian's audacious attack was broken.
Dang.
Over the next several hours, regiments of Al-Malik's dragoons came in wave after wave, firing their arquebuses at the Portuguese square. They were trained to gallop towards the enemy, and just before hitting the pikes, their horses would pirouette, enabling their riders to shoot at point-blank range before riding back out of harm's way to reload and renew the attack.
Okay, that explains why this square didn't hold up so well from the Kings and Generals telling. Yeah, there are some differences. That's what I really like. Seeing the differences so far between the Kings and Generals telling and the History Marche. Yeah, like that whole antidote. I don't remember Kings and Generals mentioning Sebastian being almost right near Malik, and almost like, you know, I don't remember that. Either way, like I said, this definitely does. There are some differences, which I'm liking, because like when I watch these YouTubers explain the same battle, some have details, others don't. So watching them gives me a much clearer picture and sees and different facts to battles we've seen. That's kind of my favorite part. That's why I don't mind watching the same battles told by different people. If anything, I do welcome it, because there are sometimes facts that other YouTubers will throw in and others won't.
The Portuguese put up a valiant fight as the pikemen held their ground and arquebusiers shot deadly volleys at the incoming enemy, cutting down nearly 7,000 Moroccan troops.
Holy crap.
But as the hours passed, their numbers dwindled and their ammunition dried up. Sebastian was seen fighting in person, and despite being wounded, he carried on inspiring his men to hold their ground. It is said that 3 horses were slain from under him, and that his bodyguards were reduced to but a few men. At some point in the battle, the king too fell while fighting. By dusk, 8,000 Christian troops lay dead on the field, and 15,000 were captured, with less than 100 managing to escape the carnage, including the former Sultan Muhammad, who either died during the battle or drowned in the river whilst trying to flee. With blood on his white garments, Abd al-Malik stood victoriously, looking every bit the leader his people needed. Yet he was close to collapsing. His robes were hiding the fact that he was strapped to his saddle, as he would otherwise not have been able to ride his horse in battle. With the disease that was about to kill him, it was miraculous that he found the strength to take active part in the fighting. Moments later, with the battle still ongoing, Sultan Abd al-Malik closed his eyes, drew his last breath, before gently slumping forward in his saddle.
Insane. Well, what a total G, dude. Like I said, the fact that he did all that while dying is beyond impressive. Just the sheer will to keep going, knowing that he needs to. Great leader.
3 kings fell on that August the 4th, 1578. As the few survivors trickled in, the news of the defeat paralyzed the Kingdom of Portugal and would have disastrous consequences. The country was deeply in debt and unable to pay for crippling financial reparations demanded by the Morocco venture. Almost every noble family suffered a slain family member, while some families were entirely extinguished as a result of the battle. To make matters worse, after King Sebastian's death, the House of Aviz, which had ruled Portugal for 200 years, was overthrown by a Castilian military invasion. The dethroned Sultan Muhammad II was reportedly thrown in the river from his horse while he was trying to flee the battle, although it is possible that he was killed in the fighting. Meanwhile, Sultan Abd al-Malik was succeeded by his brother Ahmad al-Mansur, who went on to rule Morocco for the next 25 years, becoming the most famous of all Saadi rulers. Ahmad was a highly influential figure in both Europe and Africa in the 16th century. The powerful army he had built up and Morocco's key strategic position made him an important power player during the late Renaissance period. He was described by his contemporaries as a man of profound Islamic learning, a true lover of books, calligraphy, and mathematics, and he was known as a connoisseur of mystical texts, as well as an avid participant in scholarly discussions. In many ways, his reign ushered a golden period in the history of Morocco.
Wow.
Credit goes to our awesome patrons who make videos like this one.
Now, one source notes how the Portuguese nobility were ill-suited for the rigors of the campaign in the enemy country. Instead of sharpening their weapons, they embroidered their clothes. Instead of corselets, they dress in doublets adorned with... Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was a bit like, it's one thing for the king to go, I get that, but like, bringing so much nobility there, seeing now, apparently now, if this source is true, how unprepared they were, probably a bad disaster. It's kind of like when kings just bring their families. Hey guys, we're gonna go fight this battle. Let me bring my daughters. Let me bring my sons. Let me bring my wife. And then it's like, what if the battle loses? You know what I mean? I think that happened with Darius and Alexander. Like his family got captured. So it's like probably be safer to just leave them at home. But I don't know. They eat sweets and fine foods rather than biscuits and water, which would have helped them fare better in the Morocco climate, yeah, for sure.
Possible. Consider joining them to support our work. You can also support us by subscribing to our channel and clicking the bell button to get notified.
During a war council on August 3rd, the deposed Sultan Mohammed II advised Sebastian to delay the attack for another day or two as spies informed him that Malik was seriously ill. Oh boy, the king however refused. Yeah, Sebastian, definitely, he doesn't seem like a guy who likes to wait. There is another hypothesis that Al-Malik was actually poisoned. But even then, even if like they waited for Al-Malik to expire, like his brother seems beyond competent. He literally ushered in a golden age, so I'm not sure they would have fared better, right? Even against him, like, yeah, that it was gonna be a hard-fought battle either way, I think. But yeah, overall, this was a great telling. Some facts, definitely, I liked some of the more extra facts he added that weren't President, Kings, and Generals telling. And overall, a great video, and I'm gonna pour one out to my boy Al Malik. Like, the dude was a Giga Chad, MVP of the battle. I usually don't give the MVP awards to the overall kings or commanders, like, you know, because it kind of goes without saying sometimes. But for this case, I'll make the exception. Malik gets the MVP award because the dude literally was fighting death and a battle at the exact same time. So that's pretty amazing.